Hi guys, my name is Kurt Schwarman, and this is my presentation on my research topic idea for our class, Journalistic Media in Society. For my paper and for the presentation here, I'm going to be talking about battlefield reporting. This is when reporters are sent overseas into a war zone or a conflict zone to do their reporting from basically the front lines and give a first-hand account of what's taking place within the war and on the ground, where the conflict is taking place. This is a style of reporting that has been around for quite a while now, going back, all the way to World War One, World War Two, the Korean War, Vietnam, and again recently, back in the early '90s with the Gulf War. And again, 2003 with Iraq, 2004 with Afghanistan, and unfortunately now again with everything that's beginning to happen with ISIS in the Middle East. For this presentation, I'll get into the three main sources that I'm going to be using for my paper, among all the other sources. The titles of the three sources that I'll talk about here are From the Foxhole, American Newsman, and the Reporting of World War II. And in that article, the author Brianna Boljung, she talks about the conditions that war correspondents had to go through while reporting from the front lines in World War II. It's pretty interesting. The second title that I'll be using is A Comparative Framing Analysis of Embedded and Behind the Lines Reporting on the 2003 Iraq War. And that one will get into the difference between embedded and behind the lines reporting. Some of you may already be aware of the difference there, but I'll touch on that in a bit here. And then the third source that I'll be using is Journalists and News Sources, Implications of Professionalism in War Reporting. And this is a big one. When doing my research for this whole battlefield reporting topic, professionalism was a key component that most sources touched on when talking about war reporting. Again, I'll get to that one as we move on here. So the first source that I'll talk about is From the Foxhole, American Newsman, and the Reporting of World War II. In this article, it really talks about the conditions that our war correspondents had to endure back in World War II. The article talks about how they had to live in the foxholes with the soldiers. They were basically supplied with the same clothing as the soldiers. They went through pretty much everything that the soldiers went through. However, they were there to report on what was taking place and not actually fight. Because they were on the front lines with the soldiers, there were quite a few war correspondents that were actually killed right there in the line of fire back in World War II in both Europe and in Asia. But it just shows how dedicated they were to their jobs and the extreme measures that they took to get their jobs done and to get the information about the war back home here to the people. The article talks about that during World War II, the main source of information for people back home here in America were newspapers. TV wasn't what it is now back then, and the radio was becoming more popular, but most people got their information regarding World War II through the newspapers. So it was imperative to have multiple reporters overseas reporting on the war and getting their information back here. And again, the conditions that they had to go through were pretty unbelievable. The second source is titled A Comparative Framing Analysis of Embedded and Behind the Lines Reporting on the 2003 Iraq War. And this was written by Stephen Cooper and Jim Kuipers. The difference between embedded and behind the lines reporting is that embedded reporting is when reporters are put on the ground on the front lines with the soldiers. So a lot like what I just mentioned with World War II. They're right there seeing all the action, with their own eyes right on the front lines. Whereas behind the lines reporting is a style of reporting that takes place off the front lines. So it might be back here in the U.S. with reporters behind a desk, or it might even be overseas, but just not on the front lines. In their work, Cooper and Kuipers found that there's a lot of contrasting information between embedded and behind the lines reporting. And what that means is that embedded journalists, especially with the 2003 war, they kind of painted a different picture of the war than the behind the lines reporters did. For example, the embedded reporters said that when the American and British troops invaded Iraq from Kuwait, they were met with very little resistance and were able to cross the border quite easily. Whereas the behind the lines reporters said that the American and British forces were met with heavy fire and suffered multiple casualties, which they did. There were casualties, but you can just see the difference there in the two styles of reporting. They also found that embedded reporting allows journalists to really only focus on one small area of the war itself, whereas behind the lines reporting allows a reporter to really focus on the whole war. They're kind of a step back and they can see the whole war in front of them, whereas embedded reporters, they're with one unit in the military. They're only there for specific battles or conflicts that may occur, and that's all that they can really report on. So it's pretty interesting, the difference between the two styles. The third source that I'll get into here is Journalists and News Sources: Implications of Professionalism in War Reporting. And this one was written by multiple different writers, and it just talks about how important it is that war correspondents report the truth back home. When they're over there on the front lines, they see a lot of things that most people would rather never see. They see what the soldiers see. There's people dying, and it's easy for a reporter to form an opinion on the war based on what they've seen, but it's their job to not let that opinion get in the way of what they report back home to their audience and to the citizens. So the article just really hammers home the fact that reporting the truth is so important when being a war correspondent, and that it's often real tough for reporters to not let their emotions get in the way of their writing when they're overseas like that. So just for my paper, a general outline of my paper, I'll start with going into background information regarding war reporting and reporting from the battlefield, going back to World War I, World War II, and whatnot, how it's evolved over the years, and I'll get into all my sources, but these three that I have picked out here will be the main sources that I really try to go back to throughout my paper, because they really help drive home the point, and they do a great job of giving the information necessary to get this research paper done. So that's that's my presentation, and I wish you guys all luck on yours. All right.